Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
All right, guys, I just want to say thanks for coming back to the show. I really appreciate it. This week, we've got Frater O on, and we'll go into that interview in just a moment. But first, I do need to mention our sponsors, which is Brothers Blend Coffee. If you go to www.brothersblendcoffee.com, you can pick from 3 different types of coffee, and these coffees are put together by Montgomery Lodge in Milford, Massachusetts, to provide the very finest in coffee to the brethren wheresoever dispersed, their friends, families, and colleagues, and it is a fundraiser to support the charitable causes, activities, and maintenance of that lodge. Tyler's Cup, Harmony Roast, Adoniram's Brew. Go on over there and check it out, www.brothersblendcoffee.com. Junior wardens and Masonic caterers can ask about discounts for large orders. Custom inquiries, sales at brothersblendcoffee.com. Check that out for me. Now, before we get into the episode, I do want to give you a fair warning. This week, we are answering a few questions by Brother Mike Hambrick. Brother, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, but in any case, Mike asked some great questions, some of which can be related to Freemasonry, some can be related to good health and practices. We try to tie it into Masonry as best we can, in that this is a discussion about the betterment of man, your health, your mental health specifically. So in this episode, we talk a lot about diet, the chakras, and we talk about stress and abilities to meditate and things of that nature. Again, we try to tie it back to Masonry where we can, but in some instances, some of the things that we are talking about are very difficult to tie back to Masonry as we know it. We can't tie it back to that surface level very easily sometimes. It's like if you were a Mason and you've dove deep into the ocean to find further esoteric and metaphysical teachings. A lot of Eastern philosophical stuff that's going on in this episode. So if that sounds awesome, listen on. If it doesn't, I do apologize. We will get back to a little bit more of a typical Masonic content next week with some papers that we're going to read. We're going to go into our third part on Albert Pike next week. Without any further ado, let's bring on this great conversation we had with Frater O. All right, everybody, we are back this week with Frater O. As always, awesome to have you on the show, Frater.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. So it's been a couple weeks. We took a little break. We've had some other guests on. We had Brother John Ruark to talk about his awesome survey. But before we started this week, before we start the episode, that is, we actually got a great email here from Brother Mike Hambrick. So he says that it would be great if we talked a little bit more about how the Eastern philosophies can help each of us get in better touch with our esoteric anatomy, and also getting in touch with our chakras. Maybe discuss some meditative techniques, possibly even discuss how to incorporate yoga and meditation, and maybe a little bit about specific exercises and meditation techniques that have helped each of us, and on basic levels for beginners. And Mike, first of all, Mike was so cool at the Pennsylvania Academy of Masonic Knowledge to help us out with all of the things. He was, between him and Al Leathers, it was amazing. They really helped us out with everything. So, Mike, to answer a couple of your questions, the first of all, we can kind of talk about the Eastern philosophies and helping us get in better touch with esoteric anatomy and meditative techniques. I think the Eastern philosophies, as they are represented in some of these temple maps, I guess we'll call them. And we'll put a couple links up to some of the more prevalent images that you may see regarding the esoteric anatomy. You'll notice that it's Eastern, and on those maps are usually Eastern and Western represented together as one. The Eastern side, of course, being Temple of Solomon, or somehow sometimes it's just written Temple de Solomon. And so that's the Eastern esoteric anatomy structure. And that's actually what Lodge is teaching you 7 layers down. Every part of the opening, every part of the Lodge is somehow represented this esoteric anatomy of man. There's a huge amount of, during the opening sequence of a Lodge, these higher philosophy, the Eastern philosophies can be represented in the opening of a Lodge when everything is in motion. And if you look at that motion as if you ever get a chance to sit up in the East And once you're made a Master Mason, see if the Worshipful Master will allow you to sit in the East for a meeting to witness the opening of a lodge from the East. It's an incredible experience. If you look at it that way, you can understand what's happening on the floor, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make a correlation to what's actually going on in your mind. So it's pretty interesting that way. Frater, any thoughts on the Eastern philosophies and esoteric anatomy, like a little bit more about how to get better in touch with the esoteric anatomy using those Eastern philosophies?
Yeah, just to sidetrack for a second, when we did the Occult of Personality podcast with Brother Greg, we dove a lot deeper that you didn't hear on the typical podcast in the membership section. And if you want to hear a little bit deeper than what we're going to cover today on the show,
definitely.
I would highly recommend becoming a subscriber to the membership section. It helps out him. But also you just scratch the surface with a regular podcast, but when you get to the membership section, it's deep. It's pretty cool. I had a chance. I've been listening to some of the stuff recently. I became a member, and it's great. It supports a good brother. But anyways, digressing back to the occult anatomy and esoterics, and if you get into the Eastern philosophical schools of thought, and mainly Hinduism and Buddhism, and some people can also trace lineages to the theosophical movements as well that kind of gave birth to Hinduism. And they always talk about the aspect and the polarity of the human body and the mind. And that pretty much 80% of physical issues that are going externally in your body manifest from your mind. And so much of it is mental. And even when you get into the study of actually acupuncture, the reason why they needle a certain point is because they believe that the body has chi and the body has energy, which is these trillions of cells that are going all through your body, and that the nervous system, there happens to be 12 nervous system structures come out of the brain, and they actually go down the spinal column, and 33 spinal columns, and they connect their way out. And they believe that the actual brain isn't where everything is. They believe that it actually stems out through the nervous system, and the nervous system is what holds everything, and it actually connects to all the muscle tissues and all the limbs and ligaments, and it holds the body together. And it's the electrical impulses that sends back and forth to your brain. And they believe that mental aspects can actually physically manifest. So past traumas or past experiences or situations that you're still holding on to, things you haven't let go of, they start to manifest physically into the body.
Just going to say, just this past week, I had a relapse with anxiety. And it was interesting to note that shortly before I had and this was a very, very, very mild panic attack. I would attribute the mildness to my ability to correct course now through meditative techniques when these things kind of come on. And I was actually in an odd state of mind just before it happened, and I remember thinking specifically, wow, I haven't been in this place in my mind for 7 years. And literally 20 minutes after I thought that, boom, it happened. And so then immediately after the wash of adrenaline, your body goes into this shut down, get super tired mode. Your body was washed with the adrenaline, and now it's just leaking serotonin, and you're getting super sleepy. And so that happened. Then that's the depression stage. And it's all tied back to, afterward I kept thinking, how bizarre was it that I found this place in my mind that I attributed to my anxiety, and I went there and it happened. And I was trying to explain it to my wife. After you have one of these attacks, and even have a relapse of an anxiety, depression attack, whatever, you think to yourself, if I could only forget how to get there, if I can just forget that path that I walked in my mind, erase those steps so that I never find myself in that place again. And it's really difficult to do, but you can do it. Meditative techniques.
It's amazing that you caught yourself, though. Most people, they have these constructs in their mind, and it's scripted, where immediately they start thinking this way and they go down this road and they can't stop this. It's like they're in a car and they have no idea they're in the driver's seat, but they're just going along this road. And once you're able to catch that train of thought and recondition the mind and stop that, or acknowledge what that roadblock is and defeat that roadblock or demon or whatever you want to call it, or psychological construct, you can get past that and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing on how that can manifest. And case in point, we'll get personal here. I throughout my life, there was a very traumatic experience when I was younger. Pretty serious breakup with a female, and a lot of movies would call it the Great White Buffalo, like your high school sweetheart that gets away. And for years, as crazy as this sounds, it was maybe a 5, maybe 8, 10-year period. She would just come up in my mind, and I would just push it away, and I would never deal with it. And it kept on coming back and kept on coming back until I started doing serious meditational work. This is significant that it came up, and there's a reason why this situation kept on confronting itself throughout the day, and once a week it would pop up, is because I never had closure or I never dealt with it. I just kept just walking away from it. And then as soon as I made closure with it on myself, forgave myself, I forgave her and moved on, the problem, like a knot that I was dealing with in my left shoulder, that I was there for since the breakup, immediately went away. Wow, it's like I can move my shoulder properly. And it was just the craziest aspect that was manifested so much physically. And so what's going on internally with emotions and the construct of the mind physically will bear itself on the exoskeleton of this meat suit or flesh suit or body, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And so when you get into Western culture, we've kind of lost touch with that. And digressing back to Masonry shows you the foundation on how Solomon's Temple works. And each degree we've covered, if you're first time listening or you're new to the show, dig back into our episodes. We kind of dive back into each degree and kind of get into the esoteric aspects of that.
Absolutely. His second part of the question was getting in touch with our chakras. This was something that I had not gotten into actually until I started talking to Frater O about primarily the main source of my anxiety for me was I had a physical representation of discomfort right in my solar plexus. So right in the middle of my chest, right where basically where the end of my ribs are in the center and above your belly. So just right in that area, and I would feel pulsating. Huh. And of course, the immediate thing is, aortic aneurysm. But that's super, super rare. In fact, that's exactly what happened to me just the other day. Went into the hospital and they tested me for an aortic aneurysm. They said, you're totally fine. We don't know what you felt. I know what I felt. But getting in touch with our chakras and discussing some meditative techniques for chakras and such. So how do we get in touch with our chakras?
A couple episodes back, we got into the chakras, and we referenced a video from The Last Airbender, the cartoon, which was awesome. We'll put a link to it on the show. It's really simple. Maybe it's 7-10 minutes long, cartoon fashion, and it really breaks down the chakras. And so what is chakra? It's a Sanskrit word for wheel. And they believe that when we get into chakras, this gets back into ancient Sanskrit, it gets into Hinduism and Buddhism, and it gets into esoteric circles. And each chakra is an energy center or vortex, which is related to an endocrine gland. And there's 7 different glands or chakras. The root chakra is reference to the adrenal glands. Second chakra is the ovaries or testicles, the reproductive system of men. Third is related to which is the solar plexus area, refers to the stomach, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. The fourth chakra is the heart. That's also related to the thymus gland. Fifth chakra is related to the thyroid. The sixth, the pituitary, which is also referred to as the third eye. We did an episode on this. And then the seventh, of course, the last, which is the crown, is what they referred to it, which is the pineal gland.
Fascinating stuff. In fact, there was a great book that I will put in the show notes because, as usual, I can't remember the name of it. It's a short book. It's, I think it was printed in the 70s. And I picked it up on Frater O's recommendation, and it's less than an inch thick. It doesn't read the greatest, but it gives you a great base understanding of getting in touch with chakras, and it does have some meditative techniques in there. We've talked about meditative techniques in the past. Really, to anybody listening, Mike, it really comes down to taking time for yourself. Now, there are so many instances throughout your day that you do actually have time to yourself. I'm super busy, right? I got 4 kids. I'm married. I work 40 hours or more a week. I'm active in my lodge. I go to district events. I have to be active in my district. I help the Grand Lodge with several things. I'm a really busy guy. And for me, I'm like, I definitely don't have 10, 15 minutes to give anybody. Nobody. If somebody writes me an email, I have automatic emails that shoot right back at people most of the time. I keep on. It's like, hey, I got your email, but I can't answer it right now. I will. And what it comes down to, guys, is we do have time. We do have 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, because I guarantee you, if I would just put down my phone and stop Facebooking for 10 minutes a day and just close my eyes, breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth, in through your nose, out through your mouth, like with perched lips, right? So you're basically pushing air out really nice and slow. And what that's doing is it's super oxygenating your blood, and it creates a mild, almost unnoticeable euphoric state. And then through that, envision calming visions. I use a white room in a white temple, like just blinding white light. And it's not for any particular reason other than I envision just that blinding light so that nothing comes into it. I can't see anything. I'm blind to everything. So there's no impurities. There's no worrying about my bills. There's no worrying about my kids. Nothing. In this instance, I'm alone in a room and I'm feeling okay. And it was hilarious. I had a friend of mine, and basically he wanted to see if I could affect my blood pressure. You can monitor blood pressure, right? And so when you monitor blood pressure, you have the ability to go from wherever you are down to really low numbers. Like when I was in the hospital just a few days ago, my blood pressure was elevated because I was in the hospital. I was not happy. So my blood pressure was like 130/90. And I was like, all right. My wife's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, watch this. I felt the blood pressure cuff start pumping up. I closed my eyes. I did some meditative work just in those 30 seconds while it was doing that. And it dropped my blood pressure down to like, I don't even remember. It was like 68/118. And my wife said, wow, yeah. So imagine, guys, if you can do that all the time and take 15 minutes to do that every day, or once a week even. Do just that. Frater, do you have any meditative techniques that you use frequently?
Yeah, it's a simple one, but it's I picture your mind as the stream, and you're sitting next to the stream, and all your thoughts are going down the stream. And the idea is to sit next to the stream and then just watch your thoughts. Just watch them, acknowledge it, and then let it go down the stream. And it's so amazing in the early process when I started doing the simple exercise and how often I would find myself like way far down the stream. And like you take the thought and you follow this thought, and next thing I know, I'm in the ocean where the stream connected to a river and the river connected to an ocean. I'm way far down, and I completely lost the ability to quiet the mind. And so you mentioned, it's like you have all this sensory input and overload all the time of like paying bills and Instagram and Facebook and kids and family and telephone calls and emergencies and work and stress, and it's just like you're consistently bombarded by so many variables throughout the day. And just to be able to center yourself, collect your thoughts, and not be really creative or not be really analytical or one side of the brain or other, just be still. And through time, I found myself, we've mentioned on the show before in the past, the Monroe Institute and the hemisync, the binaural beats, which are just beats per each side of the headphones when you wear headphones or earbuds, and it's a 10 oscillating waves, separate, different, that allows for hemisphere synchronization. That's why it's called hemisync. Okay, well, hemisync, what's that? So we get into yoga, which uses a lot of Eastern principles, or the idea of meditation. It's actually the ideas of balancing out the polarity of the brain or the body, which, as we mentioned earlier, goes hand in hand. So the whole idea of hemisync is actually syncing up the hemispheres. That allows you to get to these states of Mahati, or states of collective consciousness, or Christ consciousness, or Buddhistic states, or whatever you want to call it. And allows you to center yourself to get there. And it takes time to be able to quiet that mind, to quiet the ego, or that little voice that's telling you to do a million things at once.
Right.
Or the reptilian brain, which some religions refer to, that ego sits, that's really in this lower part underneath the actual hemispheres, and be able just to be still. And you mentioned earlier the ability to focus on breathing. For a long time, I didn't realize I was breathing properly. It was always short breaths throughout the day. And I noticed that when I was always taking short breaths throughout the day, I was always in some sort of state of depression or anxiety until I was able to focus consciously on my breathing. And that's what meditation allowed me to do, is center myself and realize, oh my gosh, I'm not properly breathing.
Right.
I'm in this constant state of fear.
It was really funny that you mentioned, you have this self-realization that you're not breathing correctly. Anybody who's ever done this, think about this right now. Like, as you breathe in, what expanded on your body when you did that? And if it was your chest, you're breathing wrong. It should be your belly. And when you exhale, your belly should shrink. You should breathe with your stomach. That's how you should always breathe. And I know, guys, it's kind of hard, right? Because we're always sucking in, right? Breathe right. You do yourself a massive favor. And the reason you'll know you're doing it right, and the reason we know this is right, is because we can do one thing that says why it's the right thing to do. And that is, how does somebody breathe that has never learned how to breathe from somebody else, right? Look at a baby. So if you look at an infant laying on the ground on a changing table, we've all had kids, right? Watch them breathe, and they breathe with their tummies. Big, huge breaths in, they get their little belly pops out, and when they exhale, it goes down. They don't breathe with their chest, they breathe with their stomachs. And we don't do that generally. And so when I had my first experience where I was like, oh man, I was actually backward, where I was almost like, as I inhaled, my stomach kind of went inward because my chest was expanding, right? But that's not the way it should be. So if you can consciously flip that, if you're an inward breather, like I was, flip it around and man, feel what it's like to take a deep breath and not be out of breath all day, right?
Well, there's a little shortcut too. If you don't want to do all the hard work of meditation, you can also there's an app, and there's also a really cool technology. Like, get the name of the device, where you can put it on the inside of your belt, and it attaches, touches your skin, like on your hip, and it syncs to your phone, and it keeps track of your breathing, and it has little reminders to let you know, hey, you're not breathing properly. It's just like it just breaks that cycle, or the shortness of breath. And
that's awesome.
It's pretty rad. It's pricey, it's expensive, but it's for those that are new and they want to have a massive shortcut. I highly recommend it.
So there's all kinds of great little technology things like that have started to come out in the last few years. They're technology, and they call them wearables. wearables. And a wearable, something you put on to kind of help you, whether it's your posture or breathing, or, to the most extent, if a lot of people have iPhones, that's a wearable, because as it's in your pocket, it's collecting data on your ups, your downs, your movements. So all of those things really will help you out with your breathing. And so one of the things that Mike asked also was incorporating yoga and meditation, and you kind of started to head that way, Frater. How do I incorporate them? My wife and I, probably once a week, we do just a quick 10-minute yoga stretch session where she helps me stretch out my leg, because I have I think it's just a muscle pull or something in my back, and every once in a while my hip starts to hurt, and so she stretches my leg, we do some yoga, and it goes away. And I find that the more we do the yoga and the meditation work that goes along with it, the longer I can go without having a session again. And we actually just signed up for yoga classes that we're going to be doing together every Saturday starting in a couple weeks. So we're both really stoked about that.
Nice. What kind of yoga are you going to be doing?
It's just your basic yoga. The yogi meets up there, and we're going to do from 11 to noon every Saturday. So we're looking forward to that. It's before she goes to work, and I'm off on Saturday, so it'll be a good date for you. Like, how does yoga and meditation go together for you, Frater?
We mentioned earlier on how the mind and body goes together, and the whole idea of Eastern schools of thought, or just the idea of philosophical thought of just enlightenment, and like all your thoughts and reactions are weight, like we talked about. I love to reference the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the weighing of the heart ceremony. It's a beautiful ceremony, and for those that aren't familiar with it, it's called the Trial of Ma'at. M-A'-A-T. It's the Egyptian deity, and your heart, they believed, encoded all kinds of actions and thoughts and everything you did, good and bad. And the bad things would weigh down your heart, and the good things would make your heart lighter. And so this deity would weigh your heart against a feather. There would be 42 gods that would watch, and depending on how much it weighed, if it weighed less than a feather, you were cast back into this place, and every action that was bad was done back unto you, which gets into karma or Buddhistic aspects and in reincarnation. But also, you'd be swallowed by an alligator, the god of Solbeck. And so, digressing back, this body has weight. And we talked about the emotional body physically, on the physical body. And the whole idea with yoga is like being able to free that up to emotionally unblock those things. And by stretching or doing certain poses, that's definitely a way to free up those chi blocks or energy blocks. So you can free up that energy. And so, for example, when I do two different kinds of yoga, or at least I did before the car accident. I'm looking forward here in the next 2 months to be able to get back to it after some surgeries. One was Hatha, which comes from India, and actually these both come from India. Hatha is for sun and moon, or male and female, relating to polarity of the human body and achieving that balance and centering yourself, which is a beautiful form of yoga. And another form is one I do is Kundalini, which is pretty cool, is because if you dig into esoterics and you get into the Pythagorean mentality, and the Pythagoreans, they were into sun worship, and they would, really similar to the opening closing of lodges, of in the first thing in the morning, they would face the east, they'd have no metal, they would wear white robes, they'd be barefoot and salute the sun gaze the sun, and then go about their day. They'd do this for 5 or 15 minutes. And then they would do midday. They would observe the sun at its meridian height, do the same thing, do some poses, salute the sun, wouldn't really sun gaze that much, go about the day. Then towards the end of the day, when the sun was setting in the west, they would do similar things what they did in the east, and sun gaze and do certain poses. It's interesting with Kundalini, it's all about channeling sexual energy or orgone energy, this chi energy, and focusing that more inside and channeling the energy up the spinal column and the chakras up into the pituitary gland or the pineal gland. It's interesting when you get deep into really, really unique sects of Hinduism. They have it's called breatharianism, where they focus strictly on no food, and they sun gaze. And sun gaze is they stare at the sun 15 minutes a day, and they get everything they need for nutrients. They have no waste whatsoever. There's all kinds of documentaries that have been done on these people, and they survive solely on the sun's rays. NASA has studied this extensively. There's been some published studies that have kind of slowly started to disappear, but if you look hard enough online, you might be able to find them, and to help astronauts to be able to survive in space longer without food, or to survive travel further. And there's a new documentary that just came up fairly recently. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, that gets into this too. So digressing back, light, enlightenment, body, weight. For me, it's those two forms to be able to free up those chi blocks and allow energy to properly flow. You're going to really enjoy yoga when you get into it with your wife.
Yeah, I think we're going to really have a lot of fun with it. Just being able to clear minds, just time together, no kids, to be able to focus on mind, body, and spirit, and a kind of a really healthy atmosphere. So that should be really awesome.
Nice.
So he asks a little bit about specific exercises and meditation techniques. We did talk about those already, and basic levels. So we talked about those too. And so, Mike, I hope we answered your questions. Anybody listening, I hope we didn't digress too far off the beaten path for you guys. This is, kind of our esoteric week, so this is what we cover. So we're going to go into a little bit of what we didn't get into the last time we talked, which was about, of course, chakras, and more importantly, the diet, chakras, and how that kind of relates into the Masonic idea of making man better. And we, as Masons, claim that we make good men better, or as Nick Johnson says, we make better men good. When we look at diet and the chakras, I would defer really to my resident expert, Frater O. What can you tell us about diet and chakras?
There's some really good books. One in particular that comes to mind is Spiritual Nutrition, written by Dr. Gabriel Cousins from Sedona, Arizona. His approach is esoteric, but it really gets into the esoteric of the Kabbalah. And it talks about, so if you look at the membranes and the cellular structure of each endocrine gland, regardless if it's your brain, your thyroid, your heart, your 40 feet of your GI tract or your reproductive system, it's the same membranes, and it gets repaired the same way by plant-based, pretty much probiotics or plants in general. So Gabriel Cousin, his book is pretty fascinating. Now this is pretty extreme for most people, but he talks about on how light is important for the body. We talk about vitamin D and the ability to absorb, the sun's rays, and how a lot of people have seasonal deficiencies or seasonal disorders where they don't get enough vitamin D if they're in the northern climates with sun. And he talks about the importance of how you to eat plants that are grown by the sun to be able to absorb sun. It's interesting to note, too, if you get into the Pythagorean studies, majority of them were vegetarians or vegans, and they believe the same thing. Or even a lot of ancient Rosicrucian orders, they would only eat plants grown by the sun because, again, the sun is energy, it captures the sun, it was grown by the sun. Getting back to the breatharianism, which was the extreme step that once they graduated from a plant-based diet, they strictly go on just living by the suns. And this is extreme. Yeah, for most people it sounds really far-fetched, but I urge you to research it and check out our references that we talk about. And another brother wrote, C.W. Leadbeater from the Theosophy movement wrote Vegetarianism and the Occult, and he gets deeply into the chakras and understanding the connections between plant-based nutrition. Now, I'm not saying to go vegan, I'm just saying that the plants themselves and probiotics are that actually repairs the cellular structure of the endocrine system or the endocrine glands, and how important it is to properly feed those cells. Because as Masons in the third degree, we're taught that King Solomon's temple has thousands of workmen that are building these temples, and you have to be able to. It's the junior warden's job is to keep them fed properly so they can all do their job. Think of King Solomon's temple as these trillions of cells that are going around you all the time inside of you and repairing things or rebuilding things, and they're just doing your simple jobs consistently they're just on autopilot. You don't tell your cells internally what to do, but sometimes we all have the ability to be able to direct those.
What's interesting too is we can look at, there's several societies who actually recommend kind of a plant-based diet. Like, for instance, anybody listening who may be interested in Rosicrucianism, there is a group called the Rosicrucian Fellowship, and they offer a correspondence course, and they're a smaller group, but one of the things that they recommend is a strict plant-based diet. They are vegetarians, and I gotta say, when I did nothing but vegetarian courses of meals, I did that for about a year, a little more than a year. And I did it to I didn't know if meat was having an effect on my body, so I cut it out. And I felt a lot better, of course, for a long while. I have since reintroduced meat on a very limited basis. But it is interesting to note that a lot of these organizations recommend that diet.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because when you get into most Masonic lodges, it's meat and potatoes. And I'm not saying that's bad.
Meat, potatoes, Little Caesar's pizza, and green beans.
You don't forget the cookies too.
Oh yeah. The really the 1990s tin of butter cookies that nobody ate. I dusted them off and just opened them.
Yeah, or the ones that have been sitting in the grocery store in the sale rack that are kind of like somewhat.
Yeah, I picked up cookies. It would have been better if you didn't pick up the cookies.
So, I mean, let's bring that up. And so, nutrition is so important because, let's face it. Let's look around in America today, and we're dealing with obesity epidemics, cancer epidemics. Right now, if you're listening to this, you have a 50% chance of actually getting cancer. That's a flip of a coin, which is pretty scary if you really think about that. And if you can properly feed your cells properly to avoid these complications. Like, for an example, one documentary that changed my life, and I believe you saw it too as well, Robert, is Forks Over Knives.
I did, yeah. Amazing.
For me, I was really sick I mentioned in the past, I was diagnosed with lupus. I was diagnosed with ADD, depression, anxiety, irritable bowel syndrome, and just I was so sick. I went from being a really skinny person to pushing almost 300 pounds and being on my deathbed. And literally, just that's it. 30 years old, and this is how it's going to be. This is how I go out. And just by the ability and going on the plant-based diet, I was able to reverse it all. And just being able to also uncover the ability through ADD to read and just find deeper aspects of myself. And instead of constantly my mind being stimulated on sugar and caffeine and always racing, to being able to collectively just center myself and just be able to breathe, be able to be in the now instead of always being on sensory overload or freaked out or stressed or in fear or this constantly all over the place.
We have to think about the natural state of things. Now, I'm not talking about just vegetarianism here. I'm talking about being a human who is designed to eat both plants and animal. And we look at the processed foods that just literally cram down our throat. You can think about in all of the amazing things in the creation and how amazing everything is and how intricate and how every little bit of your body is crafted in such a way that it takes care of everything else. And there has to be some sort of perfect food for you to eat that's also been crafted, and it's there, right? And this is fruits, vegetables, and meats that are natural for a human to consume. And we look at the foods that we're eating that are so highly processed, and we have to ask ourselves, is that food been paid attention to enough to be that perfect food that has existed since time immemorial for everybody to just consume to survive? It's man's creation versus the creation of the great architect. And we're looking at foods that fill you up and satisfy your hunger, and they make that go away and you can move along with your day. But what about foods that fill you up but also provide you with the nutrients that you need, the vitamins that allow your brain to secrete the chemicals it needs to move through your endocrine system and move. The chakras are all connected to the endocrine system. So if your brain is getting the correct nutrients, then it is producing the right chemicals. And if your brain is producing the right chemicals and the right ratios, you're optimizing your brain and your body. You are a good man becoming better.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at just like simple chemistry 101 of just body pH and the importance of pH and how our whole endocrine system thrives in an alkalinity state. And if you look at the body as being an acidic state by eating toxic foods or eating processed foods or eating lots of sugars or soft drinks, it usually brings the body pH to more of a negative state, and the body doesn't thrive that well. And that's when usually cancers start and tumors start to manifest, and that's when complications happen. And when you start to bring that pH back, your body really thrives. You're able to get away from consistently going for coffee and you're just drinking consistent amounts of caffeine to be able to feel energized.
Yep.
When you start researching, all caffeine does is press the button on the adrenaline glands. And if you're able to properly rebuild the adrenaline glands, you don't need to have
the coffee
or sugar to press that button.
And so I'm a huge coffee lover, huge coffee drinker. And one of the things I actually started doing was I started laying way. So now I'd have 1 cup a day maybe, and I cut it with milk quite a bit because, or I'll add baking soda to neutralize the acid in the coffee. I had my first bio teacher ever. She was amazing. A story for another time, but she was so huge on making us understand the importance of pH in the body. Now, this is a professor of biology in college who had a overzealous approach to making sure that we understood that the pH of the body is so important. And understanding that what we put into our bodies is of monumental importance. She was a former addict herself and basically kicked drugs and alcohol and became a doctor. I mean, she was a really amazing lady. But I'll never forget, her lectures on pH and how important that is.
It's amazing too, and that documentary, Forks Over Knives, it's not your typical documentary. It's all a bunch of PhDs and MDs that have gotten together and studied diet and nutrition and disease for 10 years in Asia, and find shocking correlations between people that eat lots of sugar and there's high cancer deaths, and people that eat lots of red meat or animal-based proteins, and they usually have complications, cardiac complications, and strokes and heart attacks. And they take the studies and the research, and they come back and they prove in double-blind studies with mice and rats that they could turn on and off cancer growth and on and off cholesterol growth by removing, for cholesterol growth, animal-based proteins, and then they can remove cancer growth by removing sugars. So it's really fascinating. They prove it in humans as well. And I was really sick too, is that I had really high cholesterol. And I found it interesting that I was on all these meds. There's so many crazy meds, and I was able to reverse it all by removing diet. Like my doctor thought I was a miracle case with the cholesterol pills, is that my cholesterol kept on going down. So my cholesterol disappeared. I'm really fortunate.
It is rather amazing when you look at, I was actually just reading a book, pretty fantastic one actually. It's called Eat Bacon, Don't Jog. And it's pretty funny. It goes into exactly why you may want to eat meats and stay away from a lot of things like kale, and talking about how an animal's job is to eat meat and can process things like kale. A human can't process kale unless we eat the meat that processed it for us. So it is interesting to kind of look at the different diets and the different techniques. When you talked about cholesterol, though, what I found was rather intriguing was when I went to the doctor recently, and they said, your good cholesterol is too low. And this was not the first time I heard the term good cholesterol. I've heard it before. But the first time they ever told me it was too low, I said, how do I build that up? And they said, just eat lots and lots and lots of fruits and vegetables, and you'll build up the good cholesterol and stop eating so much meat, red meat in particular. And I don't eat a whole lot of red meat, so I need to eat even less red meat. So generally, just making sure that we're paying good attention to what we are eating. And if you're like a junior warden at a lodge, right? Junior wardens are pretty typical for holding and keeping the meals moving in lodges. And don't let that bag of salad just sit in a bag. Open it up and put it on the table, and people will eat it. Make some healthy meals. Don't just always go get Little Caesars or frozen pizzas. If you got time, cook a meal and bring it down, or cook it at the lodge, because even if it's not the greatest thing in the world, the fact that you've actually prepared a meal is still healthier than anything you can just go to the store and buy from a fast food restaurant. That's my advice for in-lodge eating anyway. So we covered Mike's email pretty in-depth. We talked about a little bit of chakras, and we've talked about diet and things, and we can kind of leave it at that, I think, for the week. And we'll be talking about some more interesting topics coming up in the next couple weeks here. But Frater, I just wanted to thank you again for coming on the show, and it's always amazing to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much again for having me on. And we always encourage emails and questions. And if you have a question, shoot us an email. We'll definitely bring it up on the show.
Yeah, I actually had an error with Frater's email address. I was putting down that you could email Frater at fraterO@wcypodcast.com, but it's actually fraterolux@wcypodcast.com, or you can email him at fraterolux@gmail.com. He gets them both. So I fixed the error. So if you've sent him something in the past and he didn't get it, send it again. If you sent it through the wcypodcast.com email service. Again, we'll have links to just about everything we talked about that we can link. I do encourage those emails to come through, and we'll talk to you guys all in a couple weeks. All right, if you guys made it through that great conversation, congratulations. I hope you guys came out of it with some amazing new tips, tricks, and information to help you out on your journey toward becoming a better man. The Masonic journey, of course. Sometimes we get there through some different conversations, like we just had. So, this week, we've got an interesting famous Freemason, also submitted by Brother Mike. So, let's go into that right now. All right, so Brother Mike said, RJ, could you follow up with a famous Freemason of the Eastern philosophies? And I thought, Well, I don't know any, but he gives me one. And so the one that he gave was Swami Vivekananda. And what's interesting is this guy's a full-blown, real-deal Freemason and a Swami. He is listed on the District Grand Lodge of Bombay as a famous Freemason, or as a notable Freemason, famous Indian Masons, that is. And here is a short article, number 13, on Brother Swami Vivekananda by the author Right Worshipful Brother R. Ratnaswamy, posted on Sunday, June 16, 2002. He says, many brethren have requested that a write-up about Swami Vivekananda as a Freemason should appear in our website. Hence, this article. Swami Vivekananda was born in an upper-middle-class family in Kolkata in 1863. He was named Narendra Nath Dutta. His father, Biswanath Dutta, was a practicing attorney in Calcutta High Court. After graduation, Narendra joined the office of Brother Nemye Chandra Bose, an attorney of Calcutta High Court. He planned to complete his studies and become an attorney. He had further plans to proceed to England for higher studies. Freemasonry was introduced in India in 1730, and that too in Calcutta. The first lodge established in India is Lodge number 72. Unfortunately, that lodge was erased in 1756. Most Worshipful Grandmaster Grand Lodge of England granted the warrant for Lodge Anchor and Hope on January 10th, 1773, and the lodge itself was consecrated on the 19th of October, 1773. The lodge has been regularly meeting since then, and it is the oldest lodge still functioning. At the time of the formation of the Grand Lodge of India, that lodge opted to function under the Grand Lodge of India, which was consecrated in 1961. Lodge Anchor and Hope was the oldest lodge in India under the Grand Lodge of India then, and hence it was numbered as Lodge number 1. The foundation lodges of the Grand Lodge of India. Freemasonry in Calcutta was well received and was thought as a prestigious institution because of its tendency to make its members honorable and to make good persons still better, as it continues to do even now. Narendranath Dutta, in his quest for spiritual knowledge, was attracted to the tenets of Freemasonry, and on his seeking the privileges and mysteries of Freemasonry, his proposal was received. Brother W.C. Banerjee, a distinguished advocate, guided and helped him in the initial stages of his career. Narendranath Dutta was initiated on the 19th of February, 1884. He was passed to the degree of Fellowcraft on April 15th, 1884, and was raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason on May 20th, 1884. It would not be out of place at this stage to refer to the development of Masonic practice in India. The first Indian to be initiated was Amdat ul Amra, the last of the ruling Nawab of Carnatic. In Bengal, Hindus were not initiated on account of bylaw number 55. Brother P.C. Dute was proposed, but his proposal was turned down, invoking bylaw number 55. The matter dragged on for nearly 9 years, and finally the most worshipful Grandmaster held that the bylaw number 55 prohibiting the initiation of persons of Asian origin was bad, and annulled the same. Thereafter, Brother P.C. Dute was initiated in 1872 in the Lodge Anchor and Hope. Narendranath Dutta had no such problem. Subsequent to his initiation, he assimilated the teachings of Freemasonry. His pursuit of spiritual progress did not leave him much time for progress in Freemasonry. He did not acquire the highest honor the lodge could have conferred on any of its members, namely the mastership. He, however, was deeply imbibed in his teachings of Freemasonry, particularly the basic tenet of Freemasonry's universal brotherhood. He always used to project himself as Brother Vivekananda and treated others as brothers. His adherence to the universal brotherhood was reflected when he commenced his famous address in Chicago in the Parliament of Religions, addressing the audience as Brothers and Sisters of America. A convention of all the lodges was held in Chicago at the same time, and Brother Swami Vivekananda could not attend the same due to his participation in the Parliament of Religions. Nevertheless, Swamiji met Worshipful Brother Connor, and the latter, in his letter dated January 22nd of 1894 to Worshipful Brother Gilbert W. Bernard, introducing Swamiji, had written as follows, quote, I take very great pleasure in introducing to you personally and as a Freemason our East India brother Swami Vivekananda, whom I examined in the English work in which he was made a Master Mason and Anchor and Hope 236 E.C. End quote. Swamiji had thus acted according to the Masonic teachings of quote-unquote willingness at all times to undergo examination while properly called on. He underwent the examination and proved himself to be a Freemason 10 years after his initiation in spite of his spiritual pursuits. Prior to his leaving for the World Parliament of Religion in Chicago, Swamiji went to Kanyakumari, the southernmost tip of India, and formerly known as Cape Comorin. There is a huge piece of rock jutting out in the east in the sea, being the confluence of 3 seas. Swamiji dove into the sea and swam to the rock, and spent a few days in meditation and prayers, and obtained divine blessings. A fitting memorial has been erected on that rock with a meditation hall. It has been named Swami Vivekananda Rock Memorial, and the same can be reached by the ferry service. With a view to commemorate the holy visit to Kanyakumari and to honor the memory of such a distinguished brother, a lodge named after him was consecrated on the 12th of February 1985. It is Lodge Vivekananda number 254, and it meets on the second Saturdays in Kanyakumari. Brother Swami Vivekananda practiced the teachings of Freemasonry in his life. His writings reveal his exemplifying the principles of Freemasonry. He was a noble son of the country, very respectable in life, was very useful to mankind, and he was the brightest ornament of the fraternity in India. I hope you guys enjoyed. That's it for this week. Please remember to find us on Facebook, follow on Twitter, check us out on Google+, at the email address wcypodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and email me at that same address. I would really appreciate any feedback you guys have, including ratings on iTunes, so check that out. Speaking of checking things out, don't forget to catch the Midnight Freemasons Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays every single week. We have new content all the time. In addition to that, check out the Masonic Roundtable, going live every Tuesday at 10/9 Central. And before I go this week, I was asked if I could mention a very special something on the program, and I said I sure would. If you were in the northern Chicago area or in Chicago, on April 15, 2016, there is a Masonic Charity Night on behalf of Leyden Laurel Lodge number 1057. They're inviting you. It says, please join us for an informational meeting about a few new charitable opportunities for Masons and their families. Our lodge found some exciting new worthwhile programs that we can donate our time and money to. Please come for a presentation from the Masonic Services Association about 3 service opportunities for the lodge. Primarily, this is going to be about this new MSA dog training program. So what they do is they get dogs that are in need of rescue, and they match them up with vets who need service dogs, and the training is free. The vets don't pay anything, the dogs don't get put down, and the vet gets a friend and service mate for life, and it doesn't cost them anything. So please check this out. If you are in the area, please call John Friel. If you have any questions, you can RSVP by calling 262-358-3720 and let them know about this Masonic Charity Night on April 15th, 2016. With that, I hope you guys all have an amazing week. We'll talk to you all next time. Until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.